Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Tanya.
Welcome to what's going to actually end up being my very first podcast.
Mm.
Um, this interview, it feels so amazing, actually, that the first podcast for somatic writing, that you're the guest.
Mhm.
In many ways, I feel like when I worked with you, which I can't believe we're coming up on, it was 3 years ago. It was almost when I look back on the whole trajectory of my life and business and the birth of somatic writing, I believe it actually started with you coming to Santa Fe and becoming my client slash student, now lifelong friend. And so I want to talk today about that process to share it with others. It's been amazing and it's very relational for me with you. And uh, and let me introduce you formally to those who don't know you, who are getting to meet you today. So this is Melissa Kaplan, and Melissa completed her book and wrote her book with me, beginning the process 3 years ago. She's a brilliant somatic practitioner. She is on the faculty of Core Energetics Institute in New York City. She's the former CEO of an international nonprofit, and now she is the CEO and founder of her own business, Embody the Revolution. And I wanted to, and that's so important because you were one person, I mean, you were one role when we met. And I know the writing is part of what helped move you into your new role. So welcome. I'm super grateful to just have you. It's always a joy to speak with you. And I'm very grateful that you're going to be sharing your process around writing your book and all the changes that have been catalyzed in some ways by that process, in some ways by other elements, and just get to share your journey today with us. So thank you.
Oh, what an introduction. Thank you. Tanya, you've become since that period where I visited you in Santa Fe 3 years ago, right before the pandemic.
Right before the pandemic.
Yeah, my life has changed pretty dramatically. And I was reflecting upon the process over the last 2 days, just anticipating our conversation today. And I realized that, my life has changed, but I've really become more authentically who I was supposed to be, I think, in this lifetime, meant to be in this lifetime. And last night, something happened between me and the person I have been with in an intimate relationship with over the last year. And I was thinking, I'm going to call Tanya today and say, I don't think I can do the podcast. It was a bit of a rupture. I felt my armor come on. I was, a bit shut down. And it really was not the way I wanted to show up today with you. And then I thought this morning I was in more of a soft, vulnerable place. And then I thought, oh yeah, I really don't want to be this sort of splayed open when I'm going to talk to Tanya as well. And something occurred to me, oh no, this is exactly how I'm supposed to show up today. And this is more of the authentic way that I have been showing up in my life. And this idealized self-image of the way I used to walk through the world is not how I want to show up in my day to day. It's not how I want to show up in my leadership. And so I'm grateful to be with you today in this state of being, a bit open
Mm.
and I was remembering someone once said to me that love is the willingness to be hurt. And I'm bringing that in with me today, just that willingness to be hurt, and yeah, the companion of supporting us and being more vulnerable in our lives.
I mean, it just brings tears up as I listen to you. Just one, because I love you so much.
Mm.
And two, because of your willingness to be a human, a
Mm.
leader who isn't hiding,
Mm.
anymore, who's making that commitment to not hiding. And I think
Mm.
it's so deeply part of our connection, and the integrity of that, and the sort of old paradigm, right? Of leadership, let me pull it together,
Pull it together. Yes.
pretend, let me whatever.
Yes.
And people even still do that right in their writing.
Absolutely.
And yet the process of a truly transformative piece of writing, in your case, a book, was also that, wasn't it? It was, I mean, I felt you, I watched you, and right from the beginning, there was such a willingness in you and a readiness, not
Mm.
just a willingness, I felt a readiness to go to the deepest end of the deep, deep ocean and confront your story, your life, to retrieve the truth
Mm.
and to rewrite your story. So it's a beautiful space. And thank you for your vulnerability and just meeting me here today, meeting anyone who's listening to this or um, watching this, because this is the call of now. And you and I talk a lot about the call of this time and what we're here to do in terms of shifting the culture. Can you talk a little bit about maybe your process, and first of all, what writing the book itself catalyzed,
Yes.
and how it catalyzed other changes, perhaps?
Beautiful. I like to talk about memoir as many deaths, my process as many deaths. And, that's death to my pride,
Mm-hmm,
telling an honest story,
mm-hmm,
my self-will, my ego. I was coming up against these many deaths consistently while I wrote the memoir. I would think okay, I got through this part and now here I come again. And it's still happening.
mm-hmm.
This last night, today, I'm still, I was meeting something in me, a core wounding. I like to say that it's the healing process. It's not like we heal the core wound necessarily in this lifetime, but we keep building our capacity to meet it in different ways, you know.
Yes.
So I've worked with some of your clients and to support them in the writing process, and I've been, facilitating some of your groups.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk a lot about resistance, and I'm working with them in their resistance. And I know in my process, it's like I call it the 100 stage of resistance writing memoir.
Yeah, for real.
Right? It's whatever your core wounding is, it's going to come up
Yes.
in your process again and again, maybe more than one.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about what is my purpose in this life, and I like to say, when I work with people, it's more about, first of all, what did I come here to heal?
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into, not that it's a linear process, it most definitely is not, but then we're able to walk into our purpose once we've really addressed some of and worked through some of our core wounding. So I feel like the process of writing my memoir was, at this point, was really about capturing and learning my story. What did I come here to heal? It
Mm-hmm.
revealed itself, as much as I had learned that through my somatic journey, through my somatic therapy work. I really learned it on a whole other level when I spoke my story to you in Santa Fe 3 years ago. and then wept my story and cried and screamed my story
Yes.
with you on my knees, and then was, in writing the story, I just learned it on another level, and then that really allowed me to step into my spiritual leadership in a new way, and it's still emerging, and we'll talk about more of that in a little while. But yeah, so the 100 stages of resistance,
Oh,
and
yes.
all that you meet. And I often say resistance is the path. Whatever you're resisting, it's something that wants to emerge from you.
Mhm.
That's where the gold is. It's probably where your creative juice is. And so we want to follow and learn from the resistance.
I love that so much. And, I've integrated it so deeply into somatic writing too. It's like it's the green flag, not the red flag. And
Yeah.
it's the ego's red flag, but
Mm,
it's the green flag from our soul.
mm,
Like, it's going to be the opening, it's going to be the key. And I just know we're just longing, aren't we, for that vulnerability and that intimacy from and with each other,
mm.
because it's what
Oh,
we haven't been allowed to have, particularly in Western culture.
mm. Amen. Um, I am a preacher's daughter after all. Um, so I would say that something that's coming up for me and just feeling into the resistance,
Mhm,
that's been coming up with your clients and with my clients, and some of them we share,
mhm.
and certainly in my own, when I'm thinking back on my process, it was the um, total resistance to feeling the pain of reliving the story.
Yes,
And
yes,
I think,
always.
right? And so one thing that was able to really support me is the somatic part of
Yes.
the journey. And I think this is something where, like, the somatic writing, right, it was birthed when after we were working together, and it, so learning my story in the somatic way deeply impacted how I
Oh,
work with
yes.
people. And so I think the capacity to meet my grief
Mhm.
in such a profound way
Yes.
through my body, and it was at the beginning of the pandemic, when I was really getting into those parts of my story writing. So, there was trauma upon compounded
Oh,
upon
yes.
trauma, with the pandemic and being in isolation in New York City, as so many of us were wherever we were located. Um, but being able to use my tools somatically, there were days after writing, during writing, I didn't think that I would be able to really make it through. I mean, it
Mhm. I
practically,
remember those times.
yeah. And I'm seeing that in some of the clients we both work with, and this is just the capacity to
Mhm,
do that, and then also, to be in touch with. I often talk about the relationship between grief and pleasure, and
mhm.
rage and pleasure and grief.
Absolutely.
Right. And so being able to work with all of those, I mean, my story is also about, my liberation in part was around the merging of my sexuality and my spirituality,
Mhm.
my erotic nature. And so this was split, which is
Yes.
part of my origin story,
Yeah.
and growing up. And I'm now Jewish, but I grew up in the evangelical Southern Baptist world. My dad is a minister, and I've learned so much from him. I have a very close relationship with him. And there was so much unlearning that I needed to go through. I mean, there was a total coming undone process
Mhm.
in my own journey that really started when I was turning 40, which is where my memoir begins.
Yes.
And then, then it dramatically continues over the years. Yeah, so I think another piece of this I had to meet was around secrets.
Yeah. Right.
And that's just coming up to me as I'm thinking back to when I started the process around 40, and I
Mhm.
was holding so many secrets, and that had really been my survival strategy, one of my survival strategies,
Mhm.
to compartmentalize. And the lack of honesty in my life was very painful. The way I was coping,
And it builds up a lot of shame, right?
so much shame.
And I often say I don't believe in writer's block for people who ever learn to write. I believe in writer's shame more than
Oh, I've never
anything.
heard you say that. Mm.
That when we say writer's block, I've just found with myself and all my clients over decades now that shame is usually the block to the actual writing. Yes, grief, resistance to even be allowed to feel our rage, all the somatic pieces both you and I weave into our work with people. But it's so interesting. And your story was so fascinating to me around secrecy and shame, and very compelling because you played it out in very big dramatic ways, in a way that it makes it a great story though. And to
Mm.
love that part too, right? Ultimately, like your spirit and the adventurer, but the holding and the compartmentalizing, if I can get the word out, and the
Yeah.
holding those secrets, in this creates splits in us, and we hold shame in it, right? And how the process of self, of healing and writing the memoir is about. I love what my friend David Bedrick says about shame: unshaming. It's not
Yeah.
even feeling, unshaming, and the liberation from actually finally being able to speak right through the whole truth. And I know you were very brave in the memoir. I speak a lot about the unspoken story and the unspeakable story. It's only unspeakable, though, to our ego. The soul is longing to speak it. And you did resource in such a very profound way. I know, to be able to do that. And I want to talk about that moment when you said you weren't sure you were going to make it. Because I've been talking lately about my husband, Sid, who writing his memoir brought up terrible, debilitating old depression, and he's speaking about it publicly, writing it. I'm not saying anything without his permission. I'm not outing him. But you also just spoke into this time, not sure I'm going to make it.
Mm.
And you were writing during that time. I want to ask you, um, number one, if that was the most difficult thing about writing your memoir, and how did you, um, what were the different elements that allowed you to move through it?
Mm.
And the most valuable elements, perhaps, that allowed you to move through that?
I remember when I came to work with you in Santa Fe. Um, I was so privileged and honored to be able to make that choice, to do that, and it felt like such a profound calling when it happened. Uh, I didn't think that this was the story I would be speaking. Um, it may have been a more sanitized spiritual bypass kind of, know, I don't know what exactly my intention was, which it was just to follow my dreams had been telling me to work with you, that I needed to speak the story. What I didn't know is that I was going to be called and led in the moment to speak my unspeakable story,
Mhm.
talk about. Um, and so I think following that process, once you start, I found in my own process that once I started to really share share the story, which was my ultimate liberation. And I had been working on secrets for a couple of years before I met you. And in
Mhm.
this work in core energetics, we work with splits. So I had been
Mhm.
really working to integrate. There was something in writing it,
Mhm.
and working with you and my editor, which was a very sacred process.
Mhm.
I know that we deeply impacted each other, and
Mhm.
my editor was really impacted by our work together, and she was, also like you were part of the shaman in helping me um, birth
Mhm.
the story. Um, and I think when I talk about the grief, there's a part that I haven't really spoken about to your groups, and that is something around feeling your victim.
Mhm.
And it's something in all of my process through my work with core energetics and my somatic therapeutic work that really changed my life. It wasn't until I wrote my story that I allow, which is my story is really ultimately about self responsibility,
Mhm.
anyways,
Mhm.
which I think is something that is very liberating
Yes.
and inspiring about my story. Um, and if we don't feel our victim
Mhm.
and we skip to the self responsibility, we're
Mhm.
not going to be able to really fulfill our purpose in this world
That's
in the
right.
way that we're meant to. And if we get stuck in the victim, really, no matter what has happened to us, if we get stuck there and then don't move through to at some point to the self responsibility, then we're also not going to be able to fulfill our purpose, right?
So true. We were just talking about that in my group yesterday too. One of my labs, well, everything on the drama triangle, right? The victim, the rescuer, and the perpetrator. And that as long as we're stuck in those roles that arise from, you know, Western culture, alcoholic family systems, narcissistic family systems, we end up on the codependency sphere or on the addict sphere or some combination. Most of us do. I certainly have, in my life, and everyone, I know and think has had actually also a deep and compelling life. But as long as we're writing from one of those places, victim, rescuer, or perpetrator, we're not able to have a perspective or make meaning that's valuable to others.
Mm,
So it's to me how the healing work, the embodied energetic work, the artistic work, the creative work, all actually come together to support us in being a new kind of leader.
mm,
Yeah, actually, so the book, I really do see writers as leaders, but not in the way that patriarchal culture says, not in the way that online business culture or coaching culture says,
yeah.
right? We talk about this a lot, right? About the possibility of emerging as leaders that are supportive of the culture that is longing to be remembered and emerge now, magical culture,
Mm,
a commitment to so many things. I mean, equality, but from a profound place, from an embodied place, not some politically correct or ideological thing, but embodied anti-racism. What does it mean? Embodied decolonization. What does that mean? Particularly to those of us who have white skin in the culture, embodied, acknowledgement of indigenous ways of being, non-binary ways of being, um, creative, spiritual, matriarchal ways of being. It manifests in different ways, right? But it takes so much.
it does.
People want to take a bypass in terms of how they're out there leading and how they're out there writing. Because there's a lot of bypass and a lot of shortcuts, but you can feel the difference.
You
There's
can.
right. Can we talk about the threads
Mm,
of difference and because you've done the process, what allowed you to hold, again coming back to what supported you in holding and not just holding but challenging yourself in a way where you were really willing to become, it's like the velveteen rabbit, right? It's like to become real, to
yeah.
become alive, to
Yeah.
come alive, more alive.
That's the essence of my story. And I think that the two things, the question around how did when I thought I wasn't going to make it, I was just feeling into the thread here and also how I've emerged into my own, into what I call the new era leadership. And I think that's what you termed as well. It was attending to my nervous system. It was going really slowly. It was embracing radical honesty. And I think I talk about memoir as accountability. There's a way,
Absolutely.
right? There's a way in which now there's no turning back
Mhm.
once you start down that path. I found that's true for me.
Absolutely. It's an opening, it's a portal
It's
for a
a
way of living, a way of being, a way of
yes.
creating, leading, being in relationship.
Exactly. And for someone who, my survival strategy was compartmentalization, secrets, to embrace radical honesty was truly radical for me.
Mhm.
And now with the book and the story, and some people in my sphere have read it other than you and my editor and others. And there is no turning back. There's a way in which there's a public accountability
Yes.
now as you step into leadership, and there's a path there of being authentic and as possible in the moment, and to keep sort of assessing that in the moment. It's very relational. And that has been really liberating for me. And again, many deaths, I really thought telling the truth would be that I would die.
Mhm.
That's how, people who don't have that wounding, it's kind of hard, maybe hard to really understand how, how undone you really do have to come in
Mhm.
order to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So let me just pause there for a moment. There's so many other things. I think another thing that pause didn't last very long, did it? But it was something that I was thinking about last night. I was remembering my nieces. And I would often say to you and to Candace, my editor, I don't know how I'm going to come out with this story. I don't know
Mhm.
how I could share this publicly. And something that lived within me was around my family reading the book, and which is part of my story. It's in the memoir when I share things that I had kept secret from them, which was so healing for me in the way they met me and embraced me. It could have not been that way, and it would have still been liberating. Um, but I was thinking about, when I would consider how can I put this book out when my nieces are in this world?
Mhm.
At
Mhm.
some point they will learn about it, they'll read about it. My one niece is very captivated. She's 10 years old. Her name is Kellen. She's very captivated that I wrote a book, and she asks me about it. Where am I in the process? And it was maybe that summer that I'd been doing some deeper lineage work.
Mhm.
I was aware of, how can I not
That's right.
tell this story for them as well?
Yeah.
And one of my teachers talks about awakening as the gathering of the into the wake of consequence.
Mhm.
And that has stayed with me. It's
So
really
profound.
profound. Let me just give it some space. I think my story is about being gathered into the wake of consequence. And that is my deeper awakening. There's no bypass there. There's no comfort there. There's no safety.
My favorite words.
There's
Always not fun to live them, but this is it. I mean, this is the work.
right. And
Not
it's you
moving
have to,
towards comfort.
yes, and you have to hold complexity reading my story. And if you don't, it's going to be tough probably no matter what, but it's going to be really hard if you're not also holding complexity, which is also part
Absolutely.
of the consequence,
Totally.
right? So
Well, yeah. Yeah.
when I think about my nieces, I think and I remember having this very thought in New York City up on my rooftop when I was struggling with this. And it was, if I don't tell this story, they are doomed to repeat the pattern. This
That's
is
right.
lineage wounding. This isn't just my story.
Of course.
This is not just my story. This is a story of my maternal lineage, of my
That's right.
paternal lineage, right? Of my Polish and my Irish and my English. And this is going to be the story of my nieces. It's a part of them. And if we don't share, if we don't speak our unspeakable story, it's doomed to repeat itself.
It's absolutely, and I just love that you're bringing this in, and it's to sort of like bring everything together, because what you're also speaking of is matriarchal lineage and leadership, and understanding something people don't always know is that matriarchy is not the opposite of patriarchy. It is not women first. It is making sure that everyone in the circle is in the circle of belonging. The elders, the ancestral realms, the difficult dead, the mighty dead, and it is all for the generations to come. And I think particularly in Western white women, this is a big, profound wound you're talking about. And I have a 25-year-old daughter, and I'm aware that everything is for her. And you're talking about everything for your nieces and how they are going to impact other people's children in the world, and how those other people's children are as valuable as our children. But it's this devotion, right, to our own work to be breaking these cycles in our family for our daughters and our sons too, for those who have sons. And for the non-binary children, for the queer children, it is this, though, devotion to those. And I just love you so much. It makes me want to cry. You ended up being like, not only, you're such an amazing writer. You're such an amazing leader. You helped catalyze my redoing of my whole business, the inspiration of somatic writing. You were the new client I wanted, and you arrived before I even had the name of the business, which came like 8 months later. But I would think about, who do I want to work with, and whose voices do I want to support getting out into the world? And I think of you every time, and I think, well, I'm building this for more Melissas. And then the fact that I became your friend, that you became a supporter of mine, that we support each other in leadership. And part of that includes that we support each other in our own healing work, our own intimacy, and our friendship, which I treasure. And that I get to share you now with my clients and students, and that weaving of our worlds 3 years later, to me, is exactly what I want to be creating and serving with. And through our relationship, right, through our stories, our radical honesty with each other, sharing those commitments. And I want to say, I know that I helped you with that commitment to radical honesty, because I have that commitment. It's part of my wiring, right? It's because I'm autistic too. It can be a gift and a curse, but it's just part of who I am. But what I didn't have, that you may not even know, what you brought me to in these 3 years, energetically being so close to you, has brought me to something I didn't have at all, which was a commitment to radical self-love. And it's actually the topic we're writing on in somatic writing this month. It's our topic. And I was revealing to my students how that didn't come easily to me at all, because of my wounding. And you have influenced me in that lifetime. It's been a lifetime flip from knowing you and being in your sphere, because I feel that's something you do very well. And you embody in a really beautiful, non-selfish way. And by selfish, I mean non-ego way, but in a way that allows your divine liberation to move those of us who were fortunate to be in your world. And I'm so excited. And I want to say, I want to bring you back to celebrate and announce and everything around the book and the publication as that part of the story unfolds. And I just love you. And I'm so grateful that today I got to, that we got to do this finally after a few false starts and a difficulty scheduling, and just say, I love our story too. And I love your story and I love our story. And I think this is the way, yeah, we're doing something here that I wanted others to see. And it's a big to be continued.
To be continued. Our intimacy on display. Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to close with, or?
I feel like memoir with you was my initiation, in an initiation starved life.
Mm-hmm.
And this really, you supported me in, my beginning steps towards my own elderhood. And it was through learning my story with you, and it continues. The learning and unlearning continues in our relationship, and I'm just so grateful for all of it.
We'll end there. So much gratitude. I love you. To be continued always.